Hi guys, welcome to the War Story podcast. My audio right now might not be fantastic. I'm on the road doing this introduction, and then we will be through to the studio level quality. So just bear with us, quick introduction. Some of you might know, most of you probably don't. I'm a bit of an aviation geek. Went through that phase in childhood of wanting to be a pilot, as a lot of us do. Then realised I was more infantry material. But today's guest, he lived his dream of serving in the United States Air Force, and he was front and center for a lot of events that really changed the face of modern warfare. I'm going to read you his biography, a very short biography, I should put in. This is obviously the tip of the iceberg. Trey Morriss is a retired US Air Force colonel with 31 years of service, serving and supporting the legendary 8th Air Force. His love of aviation runs deep, shaped by stories of his grandfather and uncle who flew combat missions over Europe in World War II. Early in his career, Colonel Morriss took part in a top-secret, record-setting strike that opened Operation Desert Storm. It was the longest combat mission of its type and a turning point in modern warfare. He later flew 32 combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan following 9/11. Colonel Morris's story is fantastic, and he is a great speaker. There's also some absolute brilliant leadership nuggets in here as well. So for those of you serving, or for those of you involved in any kind of leadership role, or those of you wanting to get into those roles, then there's some absolute gold in here. As you can see, it's a very long episode, and we've only just, scraped the surface of Colonel Morris's knowledge. If you want to connect with him on social media, if you would like to pick up a copy of his book, Doom 34, a first-hand account of the top-secret mission that launched Operation Desert Storm, you can find all of that down in the show notes. As ever, guys, we just ask, if you find something valuable in today's podcast, which I know you will, please do share it on social media. Please share it with a friend. We ask that you do this with every episode that you listen to, because it's the only way that we can grow the podcast. As you know, we don't have adverts on the podcast or anything like that, which means that we rely on you guys to spread the word. Without that, we can't grow. So please do share the podcast and do connect with Colonel Morriss. That's enough from me. Let's get into the podcast. Trey, welcome to the podcast, sir. Good to have you with us today. How are you?
I'm doing great, and it's a great honor to be on your podcast. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time, so thank you for this.
Well, you're very welcome, and I'm looking forward to talking about those beautiful aircraft that you have on the pictures behind you there. But before we get into that, I'd really love to know a bit more about your kind of your journey to the military, so to speak. So could you tell us kind of where you grew up, and what were the first kind of signs that you were kind of going to be pulled towards a career in the service?
Oh yeah, I'd be happy to. That's a great passion of mine. And yeah, I grew up in Northwest Arkansas. So, that state of Arkansas sits pretty much right in the middle of the United States, and a very unique place, Springdale, Arkansas. It's home of the world famous Walmart, if you will, in Bentonville, Arkansas, just a little bit north of where I grew up. And then Tyson Foods is there, and J.B. Hunt. So it's very unique that while I grew up, I had no idea what we would look like today in that part of the region. But small town, couple 10,000 people. My father worked for the newspaper. My mom was a real estate agent. So we were just typical, kind of in between blue collar, white collar family. My inspiration was I had an uncle that was a gunner on a B-17 during World War II, and then also a grandfather that flew B-24s early in the war, and then later B-29s as an instructor pilot at Kirtland Air Force Base. So I had a lot of influence for military aviation in my family. My father loved aviation, so he continued to kind of instill that in me. And then the work values of my family. It's just tremendous how that I can see now that where I am and look back. I love looking back and seeing where really my family did so much in me. God did a lot in my life, and just a tremendous story to look back at that. And then also back to this Walmart story and this John Tyson story. So what's a little bit fascinating where I grew up in Northwest Arkansas, it's these these four towns of Bentonville, Rogers, Springdale, and Fayetteville all in a row and have grown together over the years. But as I grew up, living close to Bentonville, Arkansas, where my grandparents lived, it was routine that after church, Sam Walton would come to their house for lunch. And I can recall even as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old visiting my grandparents in the summertime, having, after church lunch with Sam Walton. And then my father went to high school and was a good friend with John Tyson. So it's interesting to me that as I look back in my life, and I've been doing a lot of reflection in these last few years as I've kind of taken on the new career path of book writing, is to understand these relationships that I grew up with, and again, we were just common people that were kind of white blue collar workers and just worked hard and did what we did in the community.
So for British listeners who maybe aren't familiar with these guys, they might know them because they might own one of their sports teams or something now, the family. Could you just give people a bit of an idea of like who those characters were, so to speak, and what they built in?
So in Britain, I believe the Walmart brand is really it's called George's.
Yeah, I think they own Asda, etc., don't they? I think.
Yeah, so that and then Tesco is also, I believe, is a spinoff of some of the Walmart. So it's a global brand, and it's such a large brand that it is the largest company in the world. It's Fortune number 100, the largest company in the world. And if you took their earnings and you say, well, let's say that's the equivalent of a gross domestic product, like that's how your country measures their wealth. It could be the 42nd largest company or country in the world if you wanted to make it look like a country. That's how big this company is. And here it is, where I grew up. And again, its founding father, Sam Walton, it was common for my grandparents to just, have an after church lunch with this guy. So it's kind of humbling when I think about the relationships that we had growing up that I had no idea until now that I've become more intuitive, more curious about my family's past through book writing.
Speaking of your family's past, you mentioned you had family served on the B-24s, B-17s. For those are, we're talking Second World War bombers here for people who are familiar. Obviously, the American casualties, just like the British in the bombers, massive in the war, one of the most dangerous branches to be across all militaries of all nationalities. Did your family talk much about their experiences, and how is it kind of like presented to you what they did in the war, the importance of it, the sacrifice, all those kind of? Yeah.
So I'll start with my grandfather. I'll start with my grandfather first, and I'll work backwards over to my uncle. Yeah, my grandfather, he actually flew for the 15th Air Force. So they're often called the Forgotten 15th. As you well know, the Lancasters the British Lancasters worked very closely with 8th Air Force that flew right out of the UK. So I'll come back to that in a minute. But my grandfather flew B-24s. He flew in the famous Palestine oil field raids. Mm-hmm. But those aircraft were mainly based in Northern Africa and in Southern Europe at the time. And, tremendous physical sacrifice on his part. He was the aircraft commander of one of those famous B-24s. And the mission that really sent him home, they lost, my grandmother described it as 2.5 engines. So he's flying home on one good engine and barely another engine. The nose cone of this B-17, if you remember, it was a lot of plexiglass in both of those aircraft, or all those aircraft, the Lancaster and the B-17 and the B-24. A lot of glass where you remember the bombardier sat in the front of those airplanes. That was totally obliterated, vanished from this aircraft. Co-pilot dead, radar navigator, the navigator, the bombardier of the day missing. So tremendous sacrifice on his part. He's shipped home, has to go through a lot of medical rehabilitation, and that's what brought him over to the B-29 because he wasn't combat ready anymore, but he still was a capable pilot. And now we're close to the end of the war where the B-29 has entered service in the Pacific region, if you recall that. and that's where he became an instructor pilot. Yeah, back to my uncle. Yeah, he flew for the Mighty 8th Air Force, which, by the way, we can get to my career in a moment, but I'm a retired, I don't wear the uniform anymore. I'm a retired colonel, but I'm a government service employee, the director of staff for the Mighty 8th Air Force, worked directly for the 2-star general as a GS, what we call government service employee. And so the history of where I am now and what I've done through my entire career supporting the Mighty 8th Air Force goes all the way back to 1942. As you mentioned, great sacrifice both by the British bomber forces and the Mighty 8th. Matter of fact, the Mighty 8th had more casualties than all of the Marines in the Pacific theater during World War II. So think about that for a minute. 27,000 bomber air crew died over the hellish skies of Europe, defending freedom, ensuring that we don't speak German, along with the British Lancaster forces. Tremendous. I mean, remember the Brits decided to do nighttime bombing, covering the area, the times of darkness, and the 8th Air Force decided to do daylight bombing. So with those two forces combined, that's really what brought the German war machine, the industry, to its knees and crippled Hitler's ability to produce war. Really, that's how we won that war, the combination of those two forces.
And would these be things that you'd hear directly from your grandparents, or would it trickle down through, like your dad and other family members who pick it up?
Yeah, it really did. It trickled. So by the time I was aware of these kind of things as a young adolescent, my grandfather was already gone. So my grandmother held those stories very close to her, and she would share those. And my grandfather had a Distinguished Flying Cross. He was a recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross from that mission that I mentioned, where he was pretty much lost everything. And so, yeah, we would hear those stories through him. Now, I didn't come back to my uncle yet. Sadly, my uncle lost his life on his very first mission.
Yeah.
And my great-grandfather would talk about really the family sacrifice. I mean, even at age 95, 100, 105, his mind was sharp, and you could still feel the sorrow in his heart whenever we would talk about my uncle, his son. So he carried that with him all the way. Well, he passed away at 104 years old. The guy they used to say that he was trapped in his body. That's how sharp he was. He would talk about World War II and living through that. And again, the sacrifice of losing his only son to that conflict. So yeah, these stories stayed with me as I went through adolescence and high school and college, and that was one of the driving factors that really brought me to military service and to pick the United States Air Force as my way to serve.
With that being the case that your uncle had given his life, how was it received in your family when you said that you wanted to go into that same kind of arena of service?
Yeah. While there was sorrow in my great-grandfather's heart and my great-grandmother's heart also over losing their only son, Jimmy, they were patriots to the core. So that's the way, that was the attitude when I decided to enter military service. My father would have, but he was one of these people that was cursed with poor eyesight and had to choose another profession, which he loved journalism. That's what he did. But so my family very much endorsed and with enthusiasm my election to go into military service.
We're kind of almost getting ahead of ourselves a bit here, but I think this is probably the place to ask it. But it sounds like, now you're an author yourself now. Obviously, you're a pilot. It sounds like a family can push people in one or two directions, right? You embrace the things that have come down, or you go in totally the different, the opposite direction. I have friends who are parents were hippies and they joined the Green Berets, right? So it sounds like you very much kind of embraced what had come down through the family in terms of like what your parents did, your grandfathers had done.
Oh, absolutely. Growing up where I did, we most people had very conservative values. Very patriotic, those kind of folks who run towards a fire versus run away from a fire, looking for where you can help people in need. All of that was part of our fabric and our DNA. So, yeah, you're right. It seems like 50-50. You'll get those families who feel the scars of it and decide to push away from country service to their country and defending freedom, and others will embrace it and actually run towards that. Yeah.
Where you grew up, I've kind of have this theory that, because I've been very lucky to travel around America a lot. I almost have this theory of the more likely you are to live in it, the more like if the area that you live in, the more that corresponds to an area where you might have natural disasters, the closer communities seem to be. And is that something that you had growing up, is the potential of, because I know some people like they live in there's tornado alleys, or if you live in certain parts of Florida, you're going to get hit by hurricanes, etc. Is that something that you had growing up and that you experienced yourself, those kind of moments of this kind of outside threat, albeit naturally bringing people together?
I've never thought of it that way, but you bring up an interesting fact, I'm going to call it. If you do examine parts of the United States, and I think even in the UK and Europe, when you look at those areas where people, because of nature or other natural disasters, they seem to have more of a closeness and a propensity to help their neighbor. They're not so much isolated because over time they have been forced by life to go over and help their neighbor in those instances. And I think even a larger example of what you just asked is 9/11 for the United States, and in our close allies like the UK. That was a horrendous day, a disaster that really brought the United States people together, and it created a long-term environment where people were less offended. And I call it the art of being unoffended, is looking past an action or a statement that maybe your neighbor said, and really looking at them as a person and a fellow countryman or an ally in the case of the UK.
So going back to your childhood, what was the existential threat as it was seen to the United States at the time, and where did you see your service lead? You mentioned 9/11. Like if you joined the military in 2003, you knew where you were going. You knew it's going to be part of the war on terror. What was it for somebody who joined the military in the 80s?
So that's a great question, because if you look at where the time period that I grew up, when I was born, it was the early 60s. You probably noticed the hair.
You got a bit gray hair.
Little gray hair, yeah. Early 60s. So, I was a typical oblivious kid growing up as an adolescent, 10, 9, 12 years old, just doing what kids do. But as I entered this teenage years, now we're talking about 75, 74, 75. So if you look at what was happening around the globe at that point, you probably recall the Vietnam War had just ended. And so as a country, and again, as a 10-year-old now, 12, 13-year-old, now I'm beginning to realize what's happening in the social fabric of the United States, especially as it relates to the Vietnam War. And if you recall, we didn't embrace that so well. And, in the military, it didn't matter what branch you served in, those individual people were not in high regard. So I call it kind of the Vietnam hangover where I grew up. It had ended, and here we are in 1972, and there was a 20-year period before we saw any great global conflict in the form of Desert Storm. So I'm just kind of embracing those stories and values from my family members through World War II. I did have an uncle that was a multiple Bronze Star and Purple Heart recipient from the Vietnam War as an Army infantryman, which I'm sure you can relate to. And then I had an uncle who was a retired Chief Master Sergeant, which for your UK audience, that's the highest enlisted rank in the United States. And he served in the Air Force. So there's another couple of influences I failed to mention early on in my selection for military career. So to get back to your question, really we're talking about kind of this lull in you were coming back from the Vietnam War and the hangover, as I called it. So there's not a lot of happening globally that really draws people that run towards the fire, like I said earlier, towards military service. It wasn't until the Desert Storm happened, which was already in the military at this point, that really kind of amped up my sense of service. I came into the military via the Officer Training Corps, not through the university or one of the service academies, in 1986, in January of 86. So again, I'm coming into the military in a time period where globally there's not a lot of conflict happening that other than the Cold War. And that's kind of has its own sense of service all by itself. So here I am. I've entered the military. I'm actually a navigator on a B-52, electronic warfare officer, to even get it to a finer point. And I'm serving the Air Force, but through the eyes of full-on superpower USSR, United States in the Cold War.
So let me just ask you, before the OTC and everything, did you ever, like, what was your first experience of flying? Because I know, like, say you're like the kind of the World War II generation. It was one of those things. A lot of those guys, the first time they ever got up in an aircraft was, when they were in the service. So did you ever have the opportunity to do any flying before you got into the service?
So you can see I'm grinning and chuckling just a little bit because I'll have to admit my idea of military service, and especially through the Air Force, was more of a love of the thought of flying versus the love of flying. And here's what I mean. My very first time to ever fly in an airplane was after I'd already signed the document to join the Air Force, and I was flying from Northwest Arkansas to Little Rock, Arkansas, the main city at the time in Arkansas, to take my flight physical. So that was it. I'd already committed. I'd already signed, pending a positive outcome in my flight physical. I was joining the Air Force, and I'd never flown in an airplane before. Now, I can tell you also, during that flight from Fayetteville, Arkansas, down to Little Rock, Arkansas, the flight down there was nice and smooth and lots of fun. Coming back, not so much, and I began to question my decision. Turbulence and a few thunderstorms. We're not flying through them, but flying around them even gets pretty bumpy and scary, and you begin to think, what did I just do? And that was my first experience in flying in an airplane.
And how about your first experience of, let's say the military experience of,
That one also has I'm questioning my decision scenario. So navigator training in the United States Air Force back during this time period that I'm describing in the mid 80s. It started out with flying a small tandem aircraft. You sat next to the pilot, a T-37. We called it the Tweet because the engine was such a high pitch it sounded like a dog whistle. So they called it the Tweet. And it was like this small little sports car, straight wing, not swept wing at all, subsonic, and hot. It's in Central California, Sacramento, summertime. Literally probably 105 degrees, 110 degrees on the tarmac. But as soon as you close that glass canopy, the temperature probably spiked to 110, 120 inside there. So you just drenched with sweat, uncomfortable. First time with, the radios blaring in your ear. You've got this young instructor pilot kind of screaming at you a little bit. We take off, and unfortunately I've got my head down doing something in the cockpit. I don't remember what it was, probably looking at my navigation chart. The next thing I know, the nose is abruptly pushed forward. We're pulling negative G's. Everything's floating in the cockpit. And then seconds later, we're pulling positive G's. Everything slams back down to the floor. And that's about the time I look up and see this gigantic owl flying off to the right-hand side of the cockpit with its wings spread out. It's so large, it's like casting a shadow inside the airplane. That was my first experience in military flying. Now, the rest of the flight was great, but here I am. Imagine you're barely 5 minutes into your first military flight, and you almost hit this gigantic owl that most assuredly would have caused us to have to eject from a perfectly good from a damaged airplane at that point.
Yeah, just explain to people a bit about this danger from birds, which, I don't know, like they've probably taken down more Western military jets than enemy missiles in the last few decades.
Oh, yeah. They call it, I forget the name of the event, but the flight on the Hudson that happened 3 or 4 years ago when a commercial airline taken off one of the airfields in the New Jersey area hit a whole flock of birds. And you remember that pilot luckily landed that aircraft in the Hudson River and saved everybody. But yes, that is for your listeners, that is always a concern for airlines, commercial airline pilots, commercial airliners, and the military. So much that we take all these certain measures to try to keep the birds away from the airfield, and it's not 100% ever that you're successful doing that. I know here at Barksville Air Force Base, we have these we call them cannons. They're just air cannons positioned around the airfield that create a sharp boom, very loud sound through compressed air, designed to flush and scare the birds from the airfield. And a lot of airfields have similar types of deterrent capabilities within the airfield. So even at slower speeds, during takeoff, but even I call it slower speeds, even during takeoff, a commercial airliner is still flying 170, 180 miles an hour. And we've all hit things in our cars traveling down the freeway at 60 or 70 miles an hour. And we've all experienced what it is for a bird, hit a bird or something larger like a deer or a stag, mm-hmm. How much damage that does even at just 60 miles an hour. So imagine double that airspeed or even 2.5 times that airspeed with the fragility nature of an aircraft versus your car. And you can quickly understand and comprehend how much damage that does to an aircraft. And then on top of that, you can imagine where it will, if it damages or destroys an engine, which, oh, by the way, all airliners are designed to fly with one engine. If it's a 2-engine aircraft, it's designed to fly with one engine. The engineers are required to create aircraft that can fly with one engine out. If it's a 4-engine aircraft, it's designed to be able to fly with only 2 engines. But anyway, side story. So yeah, that's that is always a concern, and we've seen even recent examples of bird strikes and what it will do to an aircraft.
Yeah, it always not fascinates me, I suppose, but just blows my mind that this bird can take down this. I mean, I don't know what a jet costs these days. I'm assuming hundreds of millions.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So let's go to once you got into the Air Force, how is it decided upon what role you're going to play within aircrew and what airframe you're assigned to?
So it's a combination of needs of the Air Force at the time and your ranking, your performance ranking within your peers during your training. So, for example, I'll just use me as an example. Whenever I finished my undergraduate navigator training, is what it was called back then. Now it's called a combat systems operator, CISO. But CISO used to be called just a plain old navigator, just like you're all familiar with. I'm sure your listeners are. You're ranked 1 to N. I think in my case, we had 22 people in my class, based on your flight performance and test scores, some kind of objective evaluation from your instructors. And then when it came time for you to graduate, just from a time period on the calendar, there is a supply of different types of airframes available, because that's all dictated by when those classes start. And so it's timing. A lot of timing's involved. So you could be the top graduate in your class and you want to fly fighter aircraft, an F-16 or in my case, an F-4 back in my day. And if there is one available, you don't get it. So, it's whatever's available at that time. So it's a blend of that. Again, growing up during the Cold War, B-52s and KC-135 tankers were usually the larger supply whenever you had pilots and navigators graduate from undergraduate school. So a lot of those, and lesser of the glamorous, more sexy fighter aircraft or the special ops aircraft, usually less of those. So that's kind of how it's done. It's still done that way today, depending on your ranking and what's available during that time period that you're graduating dictates what aircraft that you get. So there are people that dreamed about flying a fighter aircraft all their lives and didn't get in that cockpit because even though they were the number one grad, they were not available. Now, there are ways later on in the Air Force and even other service components that you can do cross-training and cross-assignment. Happens a lot nowadays. Now, when I was younger, it didn't happen a whole lot because, again, the needs of the Cold War force really dictated a lot of stringent, how should I say, more stringent selectivity and staying in the cockpit that you started out in.
Okay. And at what point is it that again, I'm kind of using the Second War as a reference here. This really surprised me recently. You might find this interesting, is because I always wondered how these crews get put together. And it was really a case of, because the pilots and the navigators would do a certain amount of training together, because everyone goes off and does their own training to begin with, and then they start bringing certain people together, they start working together. But when it actually came to crewing up the aircraft, apparently they just left these guys alone in a hangar and just basically went, pick your crews. And so the guys would mingle, they might have known someone from school or, a social background and things. And a lot of it just came down because, the cohesion was so important for that bomber crew, that personality really kind of mattered. So, yeah, you had these people essentially just almost like you're picking teams when you're, playing soccer or whatever at lunchtime in school. It's kind of that kind of thing. I'm assuming it was a bit more, as things got, the decades went on, that probably changed. So how is it that the Air Force goes about assembling a crew for something like a B-52?
So everything you just mentioned is a part of that ingredients, but it's later down the timeline. Really, the way we do it now is we look at the individual expertise across the crew. So let's say you've got a crew that has a very experienced aircraft commander, the guy in the left seat. And maybe he's even gone as far as he's now an instructor pilot, which would imply that he has about 4 or 5 years worth of flight training. Well, it makes sense to maybe put together a brand new co-pilot that's just come from undergraduate pilot training with that brand new pilot. So it's a lot of balance that takes place when senior leadership within those flight squadrons are looking at how to create a crew. And the same line of thought happens all the way through the team that does the navigating and the weapons delivery, the electronic warfare officer, which is what I did. And so they would look at the makeup and the experience of the individuals across that first and try to create, with the intent, the objective to create a well-balanced crew. And there are sometimes even, depending on supply of a very experienced air crew, is a leadership might stack the deck, is they'll put instructors across the entire crew force so they have a very highly experienced crew for those times where there may be a need for that type of a crew. Now, later on, even in the beginning of this, if senior leaders have folks inside the squadron that have been there a while, that kind of understand personality types. And this goes back to how you started the question, is leaders do look at who they believe will work well together in the crew concept. It's so important. But really, again, it starts first with individual expertise, creating that balance. Then they start looking at personality. Now, after the crew is formed and they're training together and they're going, their time is marched on, if they find there's an individual that for whatever reason is just not meshing well with now the new personality and cultural type of this brand new crew, they might make a change and look for a place. Maybe there's another crew that's having some difficulty because there's a personality that's just a little bit off. It's not quite meshing and not quite blending with the success of this formed crew. So again, there's a little bit of science involved with the expertise part of it, but there's a lot of art and psychology, we'll call it.
It's fascinating how to go about building a team, and I'd love to come back to leadership later and really dig into leadership a bit more. Just sticking with training for now, like the training that you went through, what was the kind of greatest lesson that you learned between joining up and between getting to your first squadron? The greatest lesson that you learned about yourself and the greatest lesson that you learned about the military.
Yeah. So that as you're asking that, I remember an exact time in space, in the space-time continuum. I can remember the exact flight. So growing up, I was one of these people that life wasn't that hard. I wanted to go play American football and do pretty well at it. I figured out how to excel at it. I was also a track runner and did that also in college. And school was not that hard. And but man, when I got into navigator training, it started out pretty easy. And I could pretty much just do an 8 to 5, didn't have to do a whole lot of after hours prep until I didn't. And that's when I had this struggle moment. And I'm sure even you had a time period during your military career where the beginning of it seemed pretty easy as far as firing your weapon, learning the weapon and the physical fitness part of it, and a little bit of the tactics and strategy. And then you probably even had your own your epiphany moment or your holy crap moment. And I had one like that too in training, where I realized this is not always going to be semi-easy, or I'll even say it was easy at first. And there was a training period where a training sortie navigator training that basically just kicked my ass. And it made me, I came home and again, in one of these times where I'm beginning to question my decisions. And also through this, I also quickly understood that you're surrounded with a lot of type A personalities, exceptional people, every one of them. It's not like going back to high school and college where the peak is very narrow. And if you're inside that peak, you look to your left and your right, and there's only 2 or 3 people that you're competing against, or you're trying to match skill sets. But when you're in those military units and their lives depend on you and you depend on them, you quickly understand you have an expectation to raise your bar and be ready 24. It's a zero fail mission. And I'm sure you experienced that too. We did in the Cold War era, and coming out of navigator school and pilot training was we were heavy in the Cold War, and everything was considered to be zero fail. Tests 100%, check rides and evaluations, perfect, 100%. So kind of coasting and gliding through high school and college, and a little bit at the beginning of navigator school and even off the training school, I quickly understood that's not going to cut it. That was where I really learned the demands and the expectations of the military.
And when you got to your first squadron, what was the first role that you went into? And what was can you remember like your first, not necessarily a combat mission, but your first your first operational mission, if that's the right term for it?
Yeah. Like your first, you might call it operational, but training mission. Yeah. So I can recall that coming into the squadron, and again, you're a brand new officer, second lieutenant. We call them the butter bars. They look like butter, and this is almost kind of your first, even though you did experience a little bit of, I hate to use the word hazing, but for lack of a better word, you experienced that some in training, like you would in boot camp for being an infantryman. But it's more built to raise that expectation level and also to start building the bonds that you need within your organization. So I did receive, a little bit of that through training before I showed up at my operational squadron, but now all of a sudden the bar's raised even more. And you show up again as a brand new second lieutenant in a sea of other officers that have been serving for 4, 5, 10 years in some cases. So you get the new guy syndrome very quickly. And you have a period before you're actually assigned to a crew that you received a little bit more training. You didn't get all the specific nuclear stuff at basic B-52 training. That was saved for when you got to your unit. And what I mean by nuclear stuff is things about the weapons, and then all of the very complex, again, zero fail procedures that you understand how to execute the nuclear mission. That's all saved for when you get to the unit. So again, this whole other bar level is there from just learning how to be a navigator and learning how to fly the B-52, and then now all of a sudden you've got to learn all about the nuclear part of the mission, which is that's the pointy end of the spear. That's why you exist. So there's a certain amount of, again, I wouldn't use the word hazing, but for lack of a better word, there's a certain amount of really focus and expectation, because that mission is so important. Now, you asked a question about the first mission. So now you're done with all that, and you finally get assigned to your first crew. And imagine, just like you probably experienced when you get assigned to do y'all call them platoons?
Yeah, you have a platoon, yeah.
Yep. So you get assigned to your first platoon, and maybe you get a maneuver type exercise you're going to do, and you're the new guy. Same with me. I'm the new guy, and everybody's looking at me of how I'm going to blend into this already established crew. They've been flying together for sometimes a year with pilots and the navigator team, and for whatever reason, their EW, electronic warfare officer, has left, and now I'm the new guy joining the team. So yeah, that's enormous pressure that you know how to do your job, but now you're having to figure out how to blend into this already successful team and not disrupt how they do things, but also adopt you as a new member of the team. And these missions we're flying at this time are like 10 hours long, 10 hours long. So it's a whole day of mission planning, whole day of flying, and then often you come in the next day and do the debrief. So it's a tremendous amount of time that you're with everybody when you fly. So again, here you're spending a whole day with people you just now met, trying to show them, convince them that you know what the hell you're doing, and then you go fly the next day. And it doesn't always go perfect. So there's always that part of trying to to be the best you can, even as the new guy, and then being also ready to accept the feedback at the end.
And you mentioned nuclear a few times here. So, okay, you guys are flying around with nuclear bombs, is what you say. You guys, that's the payload that you're carrying at this time.
We're simulating. Yeah, so we don't. So,
okay.
Decades before I came to this mission, it had been decided that was for a training mission. I'm going to stress training mission. That was decided that was not a risk worthy of a training mission to fly the nuclear weapon. So we have ways to simulate that you do have a nuclear weapon. Now, when you're on alert, that was a 24/7, 365 thing that we don't do anymore. It ended in 1991. But 1991 all the way back to the 50s, we had B-52s loaded with nuclear weapons sitting on the airfield with air crew and maintainers and security forces people also close to those aircraft 24/7, 365 a year, ready to defend freedom for our nations and really as an ally. You all did it with the Vulcan, by the way, ready for our worst day. And I participated that for 4 years before it was terminated. So we're simulating all the things it takes place to launch that jet, if we really had to do it. Thankfully, we never have. And to fly to in this case, it was Russia at the time, and execute the nuclear war.
And how is that? I mean, the only reference I can really think of here is probably Dr. Strangelove, right? So, are we talking like flying, like low-level flying, deep into hostile territory? What would a mission like that look like? Because presumably, however it looked, you trained for, right? So you would have done all the training for this stuff. So can you talk a bit through that?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the mission of the day, and it was a low-level tactic. The enemy's surface-to-air missiles and the enemy's anti-aircraft artillery and other countermeasures at the time did not have the capability to track and engage the aircraft at very low levels. So yes, we had what we call low-level ranges sporadically around the United States, dozens of them. So they look different places. Some of them are very flat and desert-like. Others were in mountainous regions, all designed to challenge and train B-52 aircrew to fly at these low levels. And the mission actually would have been executed at the 100, 200 feet realm. That's pretty darn low with an aircraft that has a 187-foot wingspan to begin with. But we trained more in the 400 to 500 foot realm. Again, depending on the terrain, we would fly a little bit higher to reduce a little bit of the risk. Now, I'm all about challenging people in high risk environments because that's how we perform and that's how we raise our expertise and our teamwork is responding to the challenge. And if we're never challenged, then how can we get better? So Yeah, these missions, the 8-hour mission, you take off out of Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana, it's northwest corner of Louisiana, state on the Gulf Coast, Gulf of America coast, and you fly about an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then you would mate up with an air refueling tanker in flight. KC-135, which is an old Boeing 707, still in service today. At the time, we also had KC-10s, which is what it sounds like. It's an old DC-10, but they're no longer in service. And you'd spend about an hour practicing air refueling. Sometimes they actually would physically pass gas to you because you would need it for an 8-hour mission. Other times it not, but you'd stay about an hour practicing the air refueling, mainly for the pilots. Because it's for a B-52. Again, this is a time this is no fly-by-wire in a B-52. It is all brute force. There's no dialing in the altitude like you see in airliners today. It was all brute force flying. That yoke is tied to cables to the control surfaces. Those 8 throttles, those are cable driven to those engines. There's cables all over the airplane. There's not a hydraulically driven, in most cases, aircraft. There's a lot of brute force. So these pilots would come off these tankers just sometimes worn out, just drenched with sweat because of the wrestling match that takes place to keep a B-52 feet behind a KC-135 and be able to connect via that air refueling boom and receive. If we're really taking fuel, sometimes we're taking somewhere in the neighborhood of 10, 12,000 gallons of fuel per aircraft. But so it's a thing. And then so after that tanker, you'd sometimes fly another hour to get to one of these low-level routes I mentioned. And we had specialized equipment that would help us avoid the terrain and a lot of procedures and a lot of crew coordination, tremendous amount of crew coordination. This is where the individual expertise mated with the credibility really helped out with crew performance. And for some procedures, you'd ease your way down into the low-level route, and then depending on the route, you might fly an hour or 2.5 hours in low level. And some days it would be fun. Other days, not so much. You'd be down there sometimes 2.5 hours in moderate to severe turbulence, just getting beat up. Other days it'd be nice and smooth and life is good. But you could be down there for 2 hours, raising up 5-10 feet and slamming down 5-10 feet for 2 hours while you're navigating through this low-level route. We do it at nighttime. So you had daytime low-level training and you had nighttime low-level training because, so the enemy has a boat. So we trained to be able to do this mission, whether it was daytime or nighttime, both on the air refueling part or the low-level piece. So we'd have weeks where we would fly 8-10 hours a mission, and we'd take off just after dark and not land till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to practice this mission there at night and the other times during the day. But it was, it was sometimes 2.5 hours of moderate and severe turbulence. And most of us have experienced at least moderate turbulence flying commercial. So imagine that being severe turbulence, which we've seen videos of people getting injured in commercial aircraft where they hit a pocket of severe turbulence. So imagine doing almost severe turbulence in a military aircraft for 2 hours. Not fun.
What's the practicalities on these long missions of eating, drinking, going to the toilet? Like how is this all worked out amongst the crew? Or are you like guys like on a fast and you just got to hold your bladder until you get back kind of thing?
Before I hit that real quick, I will add to my previous comments that the way the mission has changed over the years, both for B-52s and the B-1 bomber, is the enemy's capabilities have have increased tremendously, where they have surface-to-air missiles that can reach you all the way down to the ground. So it doesn't make sense anymore to really fly the low-level mission, especially how much long-term damage it does on the airframe. So for all of our airframes, we don't fly the strike missions in a low-level regime anymore. It's all high level now. But to answer your question, it's really up to the individual. Yeah, you have some people that for these long missions, even the ones I mentioned there that were 8-10 hours, they would fast, especially those that had a tendency to get airsick. My position, I sit backwards, no windows. You can imagine not having any visual reference. By the way, everything is backwards. People had a tendency to become actively airsick. A lot of people did. I would get sick occasionally, but never actively airsick. And that what I mean by that is vomiting. When I say act, that's a nice way of saying vomiting. A lot. So some people would fast, and other folks would be their junk food junkie day. They would bring 6 packs of full-on sugar Coca-Colas and a whole package of candy bars or some kind of pastries, and that's all they'd eat is just junk all the way through it. For really long missions, and I was younger, by the way, is I would my thing was Oreo cookies and some kind of crackers.
Oreo cookies, great shout. Big fan.
Yeah.
I just want to hit one more thing on this before we kind of wrap up this nuclear section.
Yeah.
Like we're getting towards the end of the Cold War here, but still, the Cold War's the Cold War. Did you ever think that this was something that you might, obviously you trained with the intention that this is something we might have to do, but like deep within yourself, did you think that one day we might have to drop a nuclear bomb on you? Like, because, you knew you had to be prepared, but did you ever think that you might have to do it? And if so, how did that make you feel that of that possibility? Like, because I've always thought it was fascinating, these bombers that might go home, like what do you come home to? And, is that must be like a big question, that kind of side of things.
Yeah. When you come into that mission, leadership is very, very intentional, very aggressive of helping you understand what you've gotten yourself into. And there is it's not very well accepted, but there are ways that you can separate yourself, still fly airplanes, but maybe separate yourself from that terrible thought and become a conscientious objector. But that wasn't your question. The question is yes. I'm a thinker, I'm a watcher, and a little bit of a ruminator. So yeah, there are many times that I reflected on that. I'm also a visualizer, and to kind of where you were going a little bit with your question, what does that look like when you come home? And so you almost have this compartmentalized approach to how you deal with that. And yeah, it's a horrific thought, and that's why it's so horrific. It's such a gigantic, terrible thought. That's why that's why deterrence works so well. Is as world leaders think about that had the nuclear capability, Russia, China, us, the Brits, French. And we've had them for, the 50s. And that's why this deterrent effect works. As we well know, that there's no such thing as theater nuclear war, or it just won't work. There's no such thing as that. Even one nuclear weapon at the scale of nuclear weapons today. And I said it that way to discount, not to discount really what happened at the end of World War II, but those weapons were minuscule in size compared to even the smaller nuclear weapons of today. I mean, even one nuclear weapon detonated over somebody's land would have global effects, even if it didn't escalate to something bigger. And so that's why the thought of nuclear deterrence, or mutually assured destruction is what it used to be called, still is a little bit. But the deterrent effect of a nuclear weapon, that's why it works so well. And yeah, I was around, we did that nuclear alert thing I talked about, 24/7, 365. A crew member, a maintainer, and a security forces person. Now, a crew member was sequestered to the base 1 week out of every month. So for that week, you could move around the base. You could go to, to the theater or the gym and all that stuff. But you slept and lived in a facility that was mere feet from 6-9 B-52s fully loaded with nuclear weapons. And every morning you had to go out there and make sure the systems, we call it pre-flighting, but you making sure the critical systems are still operating on the B-52 and ensure that, anyway, just ensure that the critical systems are ready for just in case. And you are around all those nuclear weapons for 30 minutes to an hour every day. So after a while, it becomes a little bit acceptable, if you will, because again, you're exposed to it so much. But it's still awe-inspiring when you're walking around a B-52 that is fully loaded with those terrible nuclear weapons. Yeah.
And how does that, like when you're around nuclear weapons, how does that fit in with your faith? Did it make you kind of, did your faith alter the way that you looked at it, or did it make you look at faith in a new way? Was there any kind of change that occurred in it, or one way or the other, because of being so close to these nuclear weapons and what they could represent, which is basically like the end of the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. And I think if anybody were to say, it doesn't affect me at all, would be lying to you. But I mean, even when we analyze the Bible and we accept that as a spoken word of God, there are plenty of places throughout the Bible, through the 1,000 years that it covers, when it talks about the life and the survival of the Israelites. There were times that even the Israeli kingdom had to do some questionable things, I would think, if you're looking at in the context of death and large scale death, right? So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I'll answer it this way. I hate that we have nuclear weapons, but I can't put the genie back in the bottle. They're there. And people often talk, well, why can't we disarm? Well, it's because not everybody's willing to disarm. For example, the Chinese right now, by the way, I need to read this. The views expressed are those of the author and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Department of War, the United States, or the United States Air Force. These are my... Well, even the Chinese will not enter into any kind of arms control agreement. We've had this one with the Russians forever, and even before Russia became Russia, the USSR. And now the Chinese are rising to, a sizable nuclear power, and they won't even talk to anybody. They won't talk to us. So again, that points back to the comment I made a minute ago. Is I'd love to be able to disarm personally. But the fact is, not everybody, not every country, not every power in the world wants to do the same. And until they do, they are part of our defense strategy. They're part of the UK's defense strategy. They're part of the French defense strategy. I mean, it's part of every freedom-loving country and those countries that want to take our way of life from us.
So, Trey, you've mentioned before 91, but it's kind of the end of the Cold War. It's a very rapid transition then from this focus that has been on Russia, and it did kind of go state on state then, but in a different kind of way, because obviously we had our first Gulf War, as we call it here, against Saddam Hussein. What was your role in that, and the role of the B-52 fleet?
So we've mentioned a little bit. I'm sorry, we're going to start like we haven't mentioned it yet. So if you recall, here is Saddam Hussein. He's got the 5th largest army in the world at this point. The Iran-Iraq war had ended. Iraq is still getting a lot of support, the Soviet-Russian support, this case through arms and expertise. And here he is in a bold move on August 2nd. He invades Kuwait. And pretty much astonishes the world because we didn't see it coming. But what also is so important and really a scary moment for the globe is that region of the world didn't look like it did today. That region had Saudi Arabia didn't really have a military. The Kuwaitis, they were overtaken in hours. U.S. didn't have any kind of presence like we have now. So at any moment, if Saddam had chosen to go west into the oil-rich fields of Saudi Arabia, which, by the way, at this point in time, really supplied a major, almost all, probably in the 80% realm, the world's energy supply. So imagine a world with a tyrant, the dictator with a very large military now with full control over a majority of the world's energy reserves. So we're looking for some kind of military force to at least blunt him in case he decides to do that. And that's where the topic of my book, Doom 3-4, comes in. It was about a top secret military capability. And it's the very first use of GPS in its infancy. I mean, the GPS, how should we say it? You may have to cut this, I'm sorry. The GPS coverage we see today was minuscule when it was in 1991. Where we have dozens and dozens of satellites today, there's only 3 at this point. That's how new this weapon was. And we didn't, and we use this term GPS just like it just flows out of our mouth, like everybody knows. We don't even go across town usually unless we put that. We know how to drive to where we're going, but we know that it's going to help us get there the fastest. So imagine a world they don't have that. And so this was pressed into service. This still was top secret, still was in test. And this was pressed in service as a blunting force. Now, as this conflict drove on and we had really, the United Nations still is working through this, and we get to January and we have a lot of forces in place. Well, the air campaign was developed, and it was realized that there were targets deep into Iraq that were critical to the success of the opening hours of the air campaign that could only be reached by this capability. It's called a conventional air launch cruise missile. And what we did as a country is we took our nuclear version, which, by the way, is still in service today, and we retrofitted it with a conventional warhead, and we gave it this GPS guidance. That's, again, it's mystical of the day. And we, on January 14th, by the way, we're coming up on that anniversary quick, and it's the 35th anniversary. We were confined to base because the January 15th was the United Nations deadline for Saddam to be removed from Kuwait or be forced out. Well, anyway, the 15th comes and goes, but on the 16th, at 0300 in the morning, we were awoken to let it be known that the mission was a go. We show up in the briefing room 0330, go through the normal briefings like you see in the movies, and at 0630, the mission called Senior Surprise. But, oh, by the way, the Senior Surprise name is even so secret, we can't even use it in open conversations. So we call it Secret Squirrel. Have to come up with something catchy. So the name Senior Surprise, even it's what we call an unacknowledged program. You can't even use the name because we don't acknowledge that this capability even exists. But anyway, these 7 B-52s, 57 airmen aboard, take to the skies at 0630, a full 14 hours before the Desert Storm even starts. So you can imagine taken to the air that many hours before conflict really starts. We have to try to get there in total secrecy, which doesn't work out so well for us. We have to get there with all 7 bombers to strike these critical targets that are pivotal to the opening campaign, the air campaign. That doesn't work out so well either. Doom 3-4, our jet. We lose an engine on takeoff. We lose 1 engine on takeoff. Only 3 minutes into the mission, you can imagine we've got 35 hours ahead of us, and we're already down 1 engine. At the same time, our navigation and bombing computer decides to reboot itself, signaling that there's something wrong, but we really don't know yet. So now we're also about to fly 14,000 miles with a compromised navigation computer. So that's just one mention and one sample of the problems that we seem to encounter every 30 minutes, every hour throughout this 35-hour mission for these old B-52s. Ours was a 57 model. So imagine driving a 57 Chevy across the United States nonstop and making it there. That's kind of where we were with this old airplane, really past its prime. So that's just sort of a taste of the Senior Surprise, Operation Senior Surprise. Again, it was part of this Desert Storm mission. I tell it through the eyes of our aircraft and my eyes of Doom 3-4. You can see it over here. This is the cover for that book, Doom 3-4, and it's again. I love this last scene in that movie, The Martian. You know what I'm talking about?
In The Martian?
Yeah, the movie The Martian.
I can't remember the
All right, go look. It's a great movie, but it talks about the last part of the movie is he talks about he's back on Earth, and talks about all the problems he had. It's so reminiscent of Long Range Strike, and he says that you're going to have problems. You can either accept that you're going to have problems, or you can deny it and just fight it the whole way. But you can accept to have problems, and you just solve them one at a time. And you find the solution to the next one, and you solve the next one. And this sounds dramatic, but it's so true. And once you say solve all those problems, you earn the right to come home. And that's what it is. It's like with Long Range Strike when you're flying across the Atlantic Ocean. Where are you going to go if you've got a problem? And you're flying through the Mediterranean and you're carrying this top secret payload. You can't just drop into somewhere because you've got a problem. Flying across Egypt, dodging surface to air missile engagements and fighters coming up to look at you, delivering your payload, and then turning around and coming home only to find that the headwinds are almost double what you planned them to be, and it's just drinking down the fuel. You're fighting these headwinds, and you're using almost double the amount of fuel you planned. It isn't like you can call somebody up and get more fuel. You just have to deal with what you're getting. That's kind of the flavor of what Doom 3-4 was, and this was actually the mission, the very moment when we woke up at 0300 in the morning. That is the moment that Desert Storm really started. It wasn't 15, 16, 17 hours later. It was that seminal moment when I've got this airman standing over me telling me, "Sir, it's time to get up and go fly a mission," with a flashlight in his hand. Right.
This has got to be, if not the longest, one of the longest bombing missions ever in history, surely.
Yeah, so at the time, it was the longest aerial combat mission in history, 35.2 hours. And I got me a little note out here I want to read you. So it actually broke somebody else's record. And the operation was called Operation Black Buck. It was 16 hours, 6,600 nautical miles. And it was a Vulcan bomber flying from the Ascension Islands to go bomb the airfield Stanley Port in the Falklands. So it was your fellow Brits that had the title, the combat mission record before we took it from them.
Well, I'm not sure I want to publish this story anymore on the podcast now that you're out there breaking British records. That's fascinating. And once this, again, there's so much more to it. There's a book's worth of stuff in it, and people can look it up. But just in terms of like the wider picture of Desert Storm, was that the one mission you flew, or was there more missions to come after that?
So out of the 7 air crew, most of them did go forward and fly other missions, either out of Spain, Diego Garcia, UK was being used at the time. Their Fairford was also being used. But for me and a handful of us, no, we stayed back. That was my only combat mission in Desert Storm. I was an instructor at the time, and we had a complement of air crew that were not quite ready to move forward and fly combat operations. And so I was held back to get them ready to move them forward to fly combat operations.
And is this what you were saying when we were talking about crew composition earlier, that in certain times, certain missions, it'll be like, right, and I mean this endearingly, get the old heads, get the old heads in there, get the experience in there. Because, like you said, if you're problem solving, you don't want someone who is his 5th day on the job and now he's over the Atlantic Ocean or whatever.
That's exactly what happened here. And you remember the part we talked about, the personality psychology of it all? So the crew that I was assigned on, they decided to move the electronic warfare officer off of that crew, who'd been there for a long time. They've been a formed crew for about a year or longer. They moved him over to somewhere where they thought he would fit a little bit better, where they had an electronic warfare officer weakness, and they put me in his place almost at the last minute. I was assigned to this crew like 2 days before the mission. But again, my personality matched pretty well. Obviously, being a highly experienced instructor, the expertise part was there, and the rest is history. Yeah.
So Trey, we talked about the nuclear side of things. Obviously, biggest threat at the time, kind of coming from Russia with the Cold War and everything. With 9/11, there was a change in focus for a lot of the military, obviously including the bombers. And sure, some of our listeners have had a front row seat to seeing the business end of payload coming down to the ground. And I'd love to know more about how the war on terror kind of refocused, reshaped the mission for the B-52 and for yourself in particular.
It's a little bit important to understand that during that 20 years, we finally have the commonality of GPS. And that really was the deciding factor that transformed the B-52 into more of a bomb truck, especially in a permissive environment like we had in Iraq. Like we had in Afghanistan, and then later in Iraq, a little bit further in the war there. But Afghanistan, first couple of weeks was not fully permissive environment. The Taliban had learned how to use the surface-to-air missiles that was antiquated there, but still there. And while there still were fighter jets within Afghanistan, there was not much that they could do with those. So there was some concern. Now, to answer your question, in GWAT over Afghanistan, this was the first large-scale use of the JDAM, the Joint Direct Attack Munitions, which was GPS guided. And so And the reason that post 9/11 conflict started so quickly, if you think about it, night one was October 7th. You know, and 9/11 obviously was 9/11. So less than a month transpired, and we're already starting combat operations. Where if you go back to Desert Storm, Saddam invaded Kuwait on August 2nd, and that conflict didn't happen until January 16th. So, you know, months it took us because we felt like as a nation and our coalition partners, and we had to do a military buildup. So that's kind of a juxtaposed example of what happened in Afghanistan. And it was because of the brilliance of really the CIA that said, wait a minute, we don't need to put a bunch of ground forces initially in Afghanistan. You know, we can put in special forces and CIA operatives, and we'll use air power in the form of B-52 and B-1 and early on B-2 bombers as, you know, the hammer, the artillery that you normally would have that would accompany artillery or tanks or whatever. So instead of having to put in all this mechanized army in place, that's where they came up with this idea of using special forces on the ground, working with the Afghani allies, and again using air power. So that's what really super transformed how bombers operate. Whether you're talking about B-52, B-1, or B-2, is the advent of an introduction of GPS on a large scale within these payloads. So for the B-52 at the time, you could only use JDAM on the wings. And internally inside the bomb bay, you could use old dumb bombs, and we carried them. We used them quite a bit because the navigation and the bombing computer had gotten better. But still, the major part of that conflict, and the reason it's so successful, was because of 2,000-pound JDAM. And we would take off from Diego Garcia, an island just south of about 400 miles south of the equator, directly below Afghanistan and India. And it's a British-owned territory, by the way. And we would fly about 5 hours all the way up to Afghanistan. And we had usually some kind of special forces person on the ground or a small team on the ground that we already had their call sign and their radio frequency and what area of the country they were working. And we'd fly to that area, call up that person, Snake Eater, Playboy, whatever their call sign was, and they would have almost always they'd have some kind of bombing assignment for us. Other times you could even hear them. They're riding on a horseback. You can hear it all over the radio. You could hear gunfire over the radio. You could hear them calling in coordinates. And while you're trying to fly, get around and get them programmed in your system and get to the bomb, the execution part, they call you back and give you new coordinates because they had been overrun by an enemy. So it was a lot of that. The early part of that conflict was very movie-like. You know, again, a guy coming over the radio yelling at you, and he's breathless, and you can hear by the way his voice is that he's on horseback. And sometimes you can hear small arms fire in the background, and he's with emotion, he's calling in coordinates for you to bomb. And then again, before he can even execute it, he's changing them because everything's different. There was a lot of that early in that conflict. And a lot of that, by the way, from October to the following January, doesn't have a lot of history recorded behind it. You know, we've all heard about Operation Anaconda. Well, that didn't happen until three and a half months into Operation Enduring Freedom over in Afghanistan.
Sorry, is Anaconda the Tora Bora one?
Yes.
Right, sorry.
Part of that, yes, it was.
Right.
Yeah. So all that time period, you've probably saw the movie. I think it's called 12 Strong. I forget the name of it.
One of the Hemsworth brothers, I think.
Yep. That's the one.
Yeah.
So in that movie where you have kind of B-52 strikes, and that was me. That was us. That was us doing.
Awesome.
But that's like the only movie, and really not a lot of documentation on what happened in the first three and a half months of Operation Enduring Freedom. But that's, again, I stress it one more time, the weapon and the GPS and really great crew expertise is what transformed the B-52 away from like a Cold War relic. And really it was a close air support platform. So was the B-1 bomber. And who would have ever thought a bomber at 38,000 feet could perform a close air support mission? And we did.
And so would you be flying up essentially to get on station, and then you're almost like just kind of waiting around for one of these guys to call in with a mission? Is that what would happen? Would you have like a continuous trying to think what it's there. Almost like, yeah, I could see, yeah. So there's always B-52s up coming from Diego Garcia. So whenever these guys get into shit, they can get on the phone and be like, I need you to just level this mountain for me.
Yeah, it really was that and more. So sometimes you would fly up there already knowing you were going to contact an individual on station. Other times you just fly, and then once you got close to on station, you would have another command and control aircraft. Either it was the U.S. Navy with the E-2, or it was the U.S. Air Force with an AWACS flying around. They had the command and control capability inside of it. And they would assign you somebody, or, yeah, you just fly up there and just say, hey, go over to the eastern part of Afghanistan and we'll get you something later. But from like October all the way to middle of December, there was enough conflict going on that you typically would be assigned to a ground individual, special forces or CIA. A lot of CIA people floating around up there. You'd be assigned somebody within minutes of coming on station.
Yeah. So these missions that you were involved in dropping munitions onto Afghanistan. I think you mentioned that it's this Tora Bora area. This is where Bin Laden was holed up, right? And he was on, him and his cronies, they're on the ropes kind of thing. What was that like as somebody who is an American, who's obviously his country's come under attack in 9/11? Did that have a special meaning to you to go on these missions? Or did you even know who was there and why you were going?
Oh, no, you did. And so I'll tell you the story of one where I actually was the mission commander, where we went and struck a confirmed sighting of Osama bin Laden. And again, it has all the elements of a thriller movie involved in. I mean, it was we were next in line to go fly, and we were woke up out of the middle of our crew rest. So we were fast asleep in our tents. Bus comes rolling up in front of our tent, which is not what normally happened. You normally walked to the bus stop at Diego Garcia, and guy runs into our tent, and he tells us, "You guys got to get dressed. You have a mission now. You got to go." And they wouldn't tell us what the mission, because we're kind of in an unclassified area, just in our tent. So they drive us to the operations building, and as we get out and we're walking in the building, everybody's high-fiving us saying, "You drew the big one." Well, still nobody's telling us what the mission is. They're just saying, "You drew the big one." I'm like, okay, I don't know what that means. Once we get into the briefing room, it's quickly revealed that Marine Recon Forces, a team of 2, had tracked bin Laden in a group of about 150 non-Afghani Arabs, who's part of his team, into one of these Tora Bora caves. So we quickly mated up with a B-1 bomber and a B-52 together, which, by the way, that has never been done before. We've never flown a B-1 and a B-52 in the same strike. So there's the first number one thing that happened. And then they decided that the B-52 was going to drop these special types of JDAM that had never been dropped off of the B-52 operationally. It was in test. So they hand us a piece of paper that says, just follow these instructions. That's number 2 first. And then, oh, by the way, typically electronic warfare officers we're not the low end of the totem pole per se, but that's kind of the way it works out. You're usually not the number one leader. You're not the usually it's a pilot. So we're all sitting there looking at all of our mission equipment, all of our papers, and we're looking at that and targets, and then I've got my head down, and I said, oh, by the way, the mission commander for tonight's mission is Major Trey Morriss. Well, you can imagine how my head snapped up and all the thoughts that are running through my mind that they assigned me to be the mission strike commander over this entire strike. But we're all professional, and we're still looking through our materials, and they tell us, your plane's out there. We've already started the engines for you. We just need you to get on and go. Time's wasted. So that's what we did. Flew the 5 hours up there in the dark. Time on target is 9 minutes and 11 seconds after midnight at 11. And we had 38,000 feet. The B-1's a little bit lower and behind us. And we prosecute this target and obliterate it using these 2,000-pound weapons. We dropped 12 on the target, and the B-1 dropped 9 on the target. Kind of back to your question. The whole time we're doing this, military guys will be military, Army guys will be Army guys, Air Force guys will be Air Force guys. We're taking notes of what's going to be in the movie. Right? Every time something happens, somebody says, write that down. That should be in the movie. So it's kind of a joke, but we also understand the gravity and the significance of what's happening here. Sadly, as you all know, Osama bin Laden was not killed in November of 2001. It was years later. By the time we get back, we learn that he had moved on. He and most of his party had left this cave complex we're told about 20 minutes before we got there. And we missed him by that much. So you can imagine the kill chain is so long. This Marine guys see him on the ground. They track him. They use SATCOM, which is, at that time sucked. Call whoever, probably all the way back to the Pentagon. It took us too long to get there. Mm-hmm. We missed him. So I even forgot what your question was at this time, but now that...
Well, just if it meant, you've covered it really, though.
Yeah, it meant so much to us. Yeah, we knew immediately the significance of what we were about to do. It sucked that we got there late. But, it is what it is. It's history played out the way it's supposed to. But the whole time, yeah, there was a chip on our shoulder throughout those 2 years, especially that first year doing direct concentrated operations in Afghanistan. By the way, I was a reservist at this point, so I have a full-time job working in the telecom industry. So I was activated and had to leave my job, and proudly left my job. And I had to. I proudly left my job and went and defended freedom. But a little bit different for me that I'm leaving my family like anybody else, but I'm also leaving this career and my work family and moving on to do this frontline combat operations as a reservist.
And how many combat operations did you fly at this time?
So between Afghanistan and then about a year later doing Iraqi freedom, I flew 32 missions between those two conflicts. So over the period of about 16, 18 months, I flew 32.
So how about those Iraqi freedom missions? Was this on enemy formations of men in armor as opposed to, because presumably in Afghanistan, you get, like you said, you've got these small special forces teams. You kind of reacting to that. Was there a difference was there a difference in Iraq where these are, it's like, right, we know where they are, we know where their formations are, now we're going to go take them off a map.
Yeah, and so was. Yes, every mission, just about every mission had a pre-planned target set. And if you didn't, you would get a target assigned to you via airborne command and control layers that were there. I think out of the, if I remember right, out of about the 15 missions I flew in Iraq, maybe only one or two was really working with a ground, we call them JTACs, but it's some kind of special forces person. Most of the time you had pre-planned targets. Now, again, occasionally you didn't. There was a time where we attacked a line of tanks, and they had all dug into the sand thinking they were going to be protected. And there had been either a SEAL or Green Beret that had already laser designated and recorded the coordinates for every one of those tanks. And there was about 12 of them in a line. So I can recall flying in pretty far from whoever this JTAC was on the ground. And it took a long time because he had to give us every set of coordinates. And we're copying down these coordinates. And we carried 12 JDAM on our wings, and you can drop them all at the same time. So we're taking our time, programming all these coordinates into the bombing system. And then we tell them, okay, now we're ready. He said, okay, we're ready. Then execute. We obliterated this line of tanks in one pass. That's why I call the B-2 a bomb truck.
Yeah. Are you seeing this on do you have screen footage of this, or is that something that you see later at debrief, or are you getting this in real time?
So at this point of B-52 capability and even B-1 capability, there's no way to self-record your strikes. Now we did get verbal feedback from the nice gentleman on the ground. Gives us feedback almost instantaneously. Part of my experiences in Iraq was, for the first time, we used a self-designating laser pod on the B-52 that did have high-definition camera capability. That was actually my last combat mission in Iraq. It was a test, and I was fortunate to be selected to be on that crew where we took that self-designating laser pod into combat and used it for the very first time off of a bomber platform. For whatever reason, this capability was available on fighter aircraft, but never available on bomber aircraft. And it's kind of a cultural separation that never could happen, and it finally did during the Iraqi freedom. And in that mission, we bombed a couple of command and control facilities with laser designated bombs. Again, this pod that you can put on the B-52 allows you through a camera to see the target, laser designate it, and then the LGB, the laser guided bomb, will travel down that laser energy to the target. So again, that one we could see. That one we were able to even video record that, and get immediate bomb damage assessment through that capability. And so that is common on B-52 and B-1 bombers today. That capability, and we were the first.
And after these strikes, would you get battle damage assessment from guys on the ground? Like you mentioned, the immediate kind of feedback, but is there special follow-ups that's done either, I don't know, again, my knowledge is mostly based on what I know about World War II. So, they'd send an aircraft over the next day to take photos of the area that had been bombed, so they could see the craters, they could see all the kind of damage. With that kind of thing, was that part of the process for you guys for debriefing?
Absolutely both. So we would get immediate feedback if it was a special forces directed attack. And there were many times if we were attacking a structure or maybe troops out in the open, that we would be asked to come back around if we still had weapons left available to reattack with maybe a new set of coordinates, refined slightly for the battlefield environment that maybe is dynamic and it's changed a little bit. So, yeah, we would get either feedback of target destroyed, no further attack, or target partially destroyed, request reattack, and then you'd get again either same targets or stand by new coordinates. So there's a lot of shorthand discussions that happen. That's what it would sound like. It would say the target destroyed, stand by new target, or target partially destroyed, reattack same coordinates, or stand by new coordinates. And you'd either copy the new coordinates or you just reattack.
So I got another World War II themed question. One of the things that always fascinates me is when the bombs go, the aircraft like lifts up into the air because of the changing weight. Is that something you'd experience on the B-52 once you dropped, like you mentioned, like all those munitions could be dropped at once? Would that happen on the B-52?
You did to a certain extent. It wasn't always as aggressive as you would see in those World War II movies. Partially, I think, because the airframe is so much heavier. I mean, because a lot of the B-52 and even the B-1 bomber is a lot of it's fuel tanks. And when you're over enemy territory, you obviously still carrying a lot of fuel because you got to get back out over enemy territory to then refuel to get enough fuel to come home. Because we staged so far away from the battlefield area. For example, in OIF, Iraqi Freedom, I flew out of Fairford.
England.
Yep. Crossed over Europe, into the Black Sea, came down through Turkey, and then through Iraq that way. So every mission I flew was like 15, 16, 17 hours, depending on how much we loitered over Iraq, or how far south we needed to get, or how far east we needed to get to a target. So again, a lot of fuel even when you're in the area, because the tankers are high value assets. So they're not going to hang out over enemy territory, especially when there's still a lot of danger involved. We're not in what we call a permissive environment. So they're going to be out on the peripheral. So again, you're carrying a lot of fuel, so it makes you heavier. What I'm getting at. So long way to say you're heavier. But yeah, you would experience it. And plus, we also had autopilot on most of the time, so it would correct pretty quickly.
All right.
You might feel a quick jump, and then it gets you back down to the altitude that it was programmed for.
What would be the frequency of these missions? Because you mentioned how long you'd be on a mission for. Are you doing these daily, every few days?
Most cases, because of the length of them, you're flying about every 3 days. Sometimes every other day. Sometimes, but a lot of every other day is a beat down. So typically it was every third day. Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to say about the kind of these war on terror missions before we kind of wrap up on those and move into a bit of leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it did really transform how all of us, our coalition partners, really approached warfare. And even Marcus Luttrell calls them the G-Waters. I mean, he's got his own name for them. And now we're starting to move back into more of a state-on-state, superpower type of approach to our national security strategy, but still keeping an eye on how we do that. But man, that was a period that everybody had the mass introduction of GPS, a lot of learning moments. I mean, even when I was still, I think it was the November time frame, and during Freedom over Afghanistan, we I actually shared a tent with the crew. There were 2 crews per tent. The other crew had that first friendly fire incident where the special forces guys accidentally called in their own coordinates. And, and that was an equipment limitation. That was something that we were learning as we were throwing this new technology on our soldiers, sailors, and airmen. So I think that's another lesson learned as we want to move fast, and we will. We'll do the best we can as a country to move faster, getting the warfighter what they need. But at the same time, these are hard lessons learned in many cases of how we do need to take a little bit of a breath and really give it critical thought to how we're moving out, both with new technology and the tactics and procedure of how to use this technology to its utmost and safest way possible. Yeah.
All right. So, Trey, you have a massive amount of experience in the military, and with that, of leading teams, of leading individuals. Is it possible in your mind to kind of like, because there's leadership can almost seem like this big kind of like nebulous term, right? Where everyone kind of bandies it about, but is it something that you can break down into almost like silos and give like clear definitions of those?
Yeah, I would love to. And this is a huge passion of mine. And I think part of it comes from, you mentioned already, just growing up, being in the military for 30 plus years. Also, I spent 12 years in the telecom industry. So I've got kind of this, I call it my Forrest Gump view of being able to see leadership from an industry perspective, and also seeing it from just a military viewpoint. And really, I break it down into 7 pillars, but really it's more of a circular viewpoint. And you'll see what I mean in a minute. And what we lose track of is when we go through the first parts of our lives, college, high school, you enter the military, there's always this push by whether it's our parents or our drill sergeant or whoever on the individual expertise part. But then it quickly starts morphing into the team cohesion. So I'm going to call those kind of the bookends for now. And so really the first part is just honing your skill, whatever that could be. I mean, again, in the military, you were an infantryman. I was a navigator, electronic warfare officer, just honing your basic skill and becoming the best you that you can be. And again, whether that's a project manager at a company, understanding the rules and the principles both in the core part of your job, and then also we often miss the nuances. The part that might be a culture to your platoon or a culture to your crew on a B-52, that's something that is very specific to giving you that individual expertise, because that quickly segues into your credibility. Whether you're leading yourself, credibility is huge because it pushes back on that self-talk, that imposter syndrome we talk about occasionally in leadership circles. The inferiority complex. If you've prepared yourself well for life or your job and your career, credibility just comes natural. Again, whether it's internally for yourself or it's the over part of the team that you're in. And obviously, I think we can all agree that that's super important when you're talking about military teams. And then how that goes next into accountability. Now, accountability starts off with a personal choice, meaning I will be accountable to my teammate. I'll be accountable to my wife, my spouse, my kids, myself. But also, I'll accept certain feedback to enforce accountability on my own part. And we'll get to that part in just a second. Now, that leads me into this concept of teachability that I sort of was alluding to. Again, another choice. I think now I'm getting into areas that in our current culture, whether, the current Western culture, is we as an individual, and then sometimes the unhealthy pride of the team, and notice I said unhealthy pride, is we refuse to be teachable. We don't want to be mentored. I joke around our house. It's kind of a joke, but it's the truth. Is my wife might be telling me, asking me to do something, I'll look at her, and my joke is, you can't tell me what to do. It's a joke, but man, you see that so much just out in society, in companies, even in the military, is we have individuals that have selected to be unteachable. They don't want people telling them what to do, and that's human nature to a point. But it really goes against really strong, professional, well-run organizations, the teachability part. And that also comes into this feedback and acceptance thing. You and I were in organizations where the debrief was part of the culture. It was accepted. It was communicated up front that we will do an operation, whether it's training or real life. We'll prepare, we'll do the operation, and then we'll come home and we'll talk about it. We'll debrief. And sometimes these debriefs are honest, hard, punch in the nose type of debriefs, but we've already created a culture that says, get ready, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do it every time. So there's this consistency piece into it also that plays in to the overall leadership. But I submit that this feedback component, there I go again, sorry. I submit that this feedback component, this debrief idea, has been lost on the current generation. Is we don't want to be teachable, and we definitely don't want anybody telling us what to do. And it's really impacting the health of our military. It's impacting the health of our organizations, our companies, our families, and even the individual. Now, then this plays into the whole concept of trust. If I'm in a group setting, or marriage or family, if I've made myself great at my job, I've created a level of credibility, I hold others accountable, and I'm willing to be held accountable. I want to be teachable, mentorable. And, oh, by the way, you can tell me the hard things. Trust takes care of itself. So especially when we're in a situation where bullets are flying over our heads, or we're rolling in on a target that has to be prosecuted now immediately, if I don't trust my team, or even in a marriage when we're sitting around looking at the bills, how we're going to pay the bills, if trust is not the underlying component in all those relationships, then what are we doing? And that fills out the final team cohesion part of my 7 to 8 leadership components here. Is, again, as I've started off, this is really a circular view. And it ends with trust rolling into team cohesion that then comes right back to individual expertise, because we want to be better. I've heard this somewhere before. You don't have to be broke to want to get better. And that's human nature. We want to be better. We want to look for that next milestone. We want to look for that next thing in life. I mean, look at you and I. We served militarily, and now we're authors. And you're a great, acceptable, great, super accepted author. But who would have thought, 15, 20 years ago, you would have however many titles, 9, depending on where you're looking at, 30 titles underneath your belt, because you look for that next individual expertise thing in your life. And that's kind of where I am right now. So anyway, those are my leadership tenets. You can look at them as pillars, but really they're kind of this circular, and then it just rinses and repeats on itself.
Yeah, I want to come back to something you said earlier. Like, you kind of were talking about the art of being unoffended. And that, I think sometimes people will take, the art of being unoffended maybe as just, the sticks and stones can't break my bone kind of side of thing. But it's a lot more than that, because you need to be able to, in order to learn, every one of us right now thinks that we know what we know. We have our ideas, we have our politics, whatever it is. And in order to ever learn and entertain other ideas, you have to be willing to offend your own kind of set of structures within your mind about how you think about things, what your beliefs. So offense, like, I just kind of want to make clear, like, it's not just about, the way that something's delivered, it's what is delivered, correct? So it's, if you've been, like, I bet if I went in, I bet now if I went, if I like joined the army again and someone was teaching me something that's the way things done now, there'd be a part of me that's like, well, that's not how we used to do it, and that is because that part of me, that character of me, that person who thought he was good at his job at the time is now being told in a way, yeah, you know what, we found the better way of doing it. You thought you were really good at how you did it, but we've actually found the better way. So that kind of offends that person who was that professional before. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of, I think, is kind of something we all have to do. Like and I agree with you. Like where we are as a culture, I've been I've been on a bit of an ancient Greek thing recently. I should specify what I mean by that before people get ideas. By ancient Greek thing, I mean, getting, reading up on my ancient Greek histories and stuff. And I think that kind of culture of debate, of presenting ideas, having to defend ideas, is really missing. Is really missing now. And if you don't get that as a society, you're probably not going to have that trickle down of having it in yourself, because you should always be debating yourself too, right?
Yeah. And and your rank and your position within an organization only carries you so far when it comes to this topic we're talking about, being offended. Because, and so when people understand your heart, let me explain that. When you go through this building block approach that I talked about, individual expertise, credibility, accountability, teachability, they understand your heart well enough that when it's time for a hard-hitting teachability feedback point, and let's say you don't do it, you don't deliver it so well today, people look past that because they understand your heart. That's another component is we will quickly listen to the message and the delivery method and forget to learn about the person's heart. What was their true motivation? Was it to make you better, or was it to be a jerk to you? Well, typically, 90% of the time, people are not trying to be a jerk to you. They're just not great at delivery, or you don't have a relationship with them yet.
Yeah, and I feel that's something that's missing largely. Like, when I hear the story about how careful instructors have to be now in what they say to recruits and stuff, I always say, look, they're trying to keep these guys alive. It doesn't matter how they say, like, how their lesson is delivered. Their intention is to keep these people alive. And I think you can spot it at all levels of society, but I think it's most dangerous when it's in the military, because as we've talked, about today on, today's episode, it's the stakes cannot be higher. And when the stakes are higher, this art of being unoffended, it's not just about making you a better person, it's about keeping you alive as a person.
Absolutely. Yep.
So when you were leading in the Air Force, what's the kind of the culture when you were in of, because obviously you have a rank structure like every other military. How does it work with when a crew's coming together to plan for a mission, to debrief for a mission? Does everyone get to have an input? Is it almost a kind of like a kind of a round table approach? How do you go about that?
Absolutely, it is. It's a round table approach. Now, we have an accepted checklist that guides you through the top items so that we ensure that we cover everything. But inside those items, it's round table. Every person gets a vote. You come to the debrief with no rank. We call it CRM, Crew Resource Management, and it's a concept that you come to the table with no rank. You fly with no rank, matter of fact, so that it gives every individual, whether they're the lowest ranking crew member or the highest ranking crew member, equal footing. I mean, you obviously during the mission execution and the debrief, you never want the lowest ranking individual to feel like they're less valued to the point where they don't contribute in the mission fully. And at the end of the debrief, they don't point out the missteps in the places where the crew either violated procedure, grossly violated procedure, or there's just a place that they could get better. So it very much is a round table, very much it's immediate culture within the Air Force organizations, crew organizations, that you approach operations and the debrief with no rank.
Now, I'd love to know, is there, when you're thinking about leadership, and this could be someone who you either served beneath or alongside, or even someone that you've learned from through books or history or wherever. But what's kind of if you've ever seen someone, because obviously we all have our flaws, but who's the person you kind of look to and just go, that embodies all of these things that you think about as a great leader having possession of?
So it's a tough one right now because, I'm still serving through the government service program, right? And so even if I had the names to protect the innocent, people will know right away who I'm talking about. But
all right, well, let's have a historical one then. This could be someone that you've read about from afar.
No, I think I kind of said that jokingly a minute ago, but I think it probably, to answer your question, it's more of a blend of leadership styles. And it follows it really follows the tenets that I mentioned earlier that culminate in that trust factor. So being in the organization I am now, the Mighty 8th Air Force, I'm considered to be like the number 2 or the number 4 guy in the entire organization. And, we're 23,000 strong. We have all these wings across the Air Force operating bombers and also the E-4B, which is a command and control aircraft. So it's the visibility I get to see, and commanders come and go. Every 2 years, we get another 2-star general that comes and goes that I work directly for. So really, I would say I would take components of every one of the last 6 commanders that I've served with, and could put a list of, hey, these are the things that I like personally. These are the things I don't like, but it doesn't mean that these don't like columns really worked or not worked. Micromanagement is a thing we all kind of push away from, but occasionally it's warranted because that commander's still looking to build trust with his subordinates. So it may appear micromanaged, but really it's a time period of normal organic relationship growth that you have to go through so that this commander can now trust these main folks in his organization. So you have to understand a little bit of what you would consider negative leadership could just be a temporary measure to build a relationship between the commander and the subordinate. Same with any other organization in society. I worked for Verizon Wireless for a while. I saw the same things inside there. Counter to that is you do have some commanders and some top leaders that it's important for them to lead via their style, but also via their position. Meaning, it's not sometimes okay to come and introduce yourself to the team by your first name, for example. It's better to use either your rank or I'm vice president, whatever, because position is important to a point, and also to a specific setting. So there's that. I've seen that throughout my Air Force career, that I have a brigadier general all the way up who continually uses his first name rather than his rank. In my opinion, in some settings, it's important to have that rank thrown out there for your subordinates to hear, or maybe a certain group that you're addressing. So anyway, I didn't answer your question specifically.
No, I get it. I like that, and I agree as well. Like, in my own experience, being able to have, very informal kind of ways of addressing your certain commanders, but then when in the time and place revert into rank. And I've always thought, as things get a bit more life and death, then that rank just kind of makes things almost a bit more, I guess, impersonal in a way, or just, I don't know, there's just something about if your captain tells you to go and do something you think might get you killed, it's a lot easier than doing that than if Dave tells you to go and do it. It's like, they're just, I don't know. They just, that might just be me. I just feel like
no, and that's exactly what I was talking about with different words. You are, in my opinion, you are spot on. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to touch on? I mean, I know you have a wealth of knowledge on leadership, but is there anything in particular you'd kind of like to touch on leadership before we kind of wrap up on this little section?
Yeah, and I think I do. I've got one small point, and I'll be transparent. This is a place that I struggle, and it's the hard conversations. It's usually, you can't usually adopt a standard way of how you are going to have hard conversations with your teammates, with your subordinates. You kind of have to learn to tailor that for the person a little bit. And I'm not saying totally soften it for a person, that may not take it well and be really hard-nosed and hard-hearted for those that can. There's a good medium in there. But I think that's another place is our society has moved into a place where we have a little bit of and I'm going to use the word fear as a leader to be hard and with the messaging when it's appropriate. And so I would say that's another area that we intentionally have to put enough energy and thought that it's okay to have a hard conversation, because actually most people appreciate that better. They appreciate the honesty behind it. They appreciate that you valued and respected them enough that it was okay to be honest and, respectful with the delivery, but be honest with them, because that's really what our goal is the message piece, the feedback. But anyway, that's my last rant on leadership. And I'll be honest, that's a place I struggle with.
What, as in receiving or delivering?
Delivering. Well, yes. Actually, I love, and so that's a great example. Take my own medicine. I love hard-nosed feedback given to me because it helps me understand, again, that my boss is watching, my boss cares, or it could even be my peers. They're watching, they care, and they saw maybe it was a blind spot. Right? Those are the worst, I think, for an organization. And I want to know about that. And I even tell my subordinates, I want you to tell me about my blind spots, and I want you to use the word no if it's appropriate. Nope, my plate's full. Nope, and I even tell them, you can even say, no, that's a stupid idea. No, it's a stupid idea. They can end it in sir if they want to. I'm kidding. Well, that's another expectation thing that I ensure my subordinates, my teammates, people, both my peers and the people who work vertically underneath me, they understand that they are empowered to tell me no. And I actually ask my 2-star general when we get a new one, am I empowered to tell you you're about to drive off a cliff? And not one of them ever said no, but you'd be surprised how many of them paused long before they said, you are empowered. So some even think through that, like, do I want this guy telling me? And I've even used the word, is it okay, General, if I tell you you're being stupid? And again, some of them say, it's okay. Others have paused. So I found that interesting over my career.
Well, I mean, in your new career as an author, you're definitely going to get hard-nosed feedback. Because that is that's part and parcel. I always say that to people: if you're not willing to, if you're not willing to have people be very critical of you, then don't put your stuff out.
So can I ask you a question about that real quick?
Yeah. No.
So when you left the military, you decided, and I saw in kind of your bio that you went off and did some contract work for a while, and then somewhere in the midst, you decided to write. Was that new to you? Was that a risk?
No, I always knew I wanted to write. It's just I hadn't ever had the time to do it.
But did you know you were any?
Once I got on the ships.
Yeah. Did you know you were any good at it?
I mean, I'm a cocky bugger, so. I just assume I'm good at everything, really.
All right.
Yeah. I've always read. I've always read since I was a little kid. I've never been able to get enough books, and I feel like anything in life is reps. You just got to do reps, and I think people skip this step way too often. Is I'll have people say to me quite often, and I admire the enterprise, but yeah, I'm not really into reading, but I've written a book, and do you mind having a look at it? And I know straight away it's not going to be able to part, because how could it be? It'd be like if someone says, yeah, I've never watched anybody weightlifting or read anything about how to lift weights correctly, but now I want to be Mr. Olympia. It's not going to happen. Yeah. You've got to learn, and people skip that step. I had confidence, but then I'll say this: I don't go back and read what I wrote 10 years ago, because I know I'd hate it. I know I'd hate it. So could I write? Yeah, I could write, but would I now accept that standard of what I had 10 years ago? No, absolutely not. So
okay,
yeah, there's that kind of side of it. But no, I always say this: I've been very lucky in life. I knew I wanted to be a soldier, I knew I wanted to be a writer, and I've got to do both of those things. So not particularly well at either, but I got to do it. So that is, so that's something I'm very, very kind of grateful for. So Trey, I have some questions here that they're kind of like, we could say these a bit more lighthearted. We've had a lot of combat, we've had leadership, but this one always fascinates me. I forget what they call them now, but when you and your crew, you spent a lot of time up in the sky. And we've had all this stuff in recent years about, I forget the name of that. It's not UFOs anymore, is it? They have these different names. It's a different name, is it?
Yeah.
Did you ever see any of these tic-tacky things that people talk about, or these weird light formations or anything? Or have you ever heard of stories about that kind of thing? I think we could talk about it now because it's in the public domain, right?
Yeah. No, I honestly, no. I have, I'd love to be able to say that I've seen an unexplained phenomenon like that, but never did. I personally believe that, when astronomers and mathematicians tell you the trillions and trillions of stars out there in space that also must have trillions and trillions of habitable planets around them, can we, as a human species, be so arrogant to say we're the only ones? And so that's one perspective. But the other is all the science about long-range travel. I mean, all we know from physics, from Einstein's theory, that it's almost impossible to fly faster than the speed of light. I use the word almost because we don't understand maybe other science that just we haven't discovered yet. But the way we know theory right now, there's really no way to travel from those places that we see that are habitable, that are so far away, it would take multiple lifetimes to get there. So anyway, there's my theory, but I have never seen anything.
Now that you've given that answer, I'm going to have people tell me that this is some kind of what do they call them, like CIA kind of thing. Oh yeah, of course you'd have the guy on to say that he hasn't seen it. Like when it becomes this thing of when people are so convinced that they know the answer already. It's kind of what we were saying earlier. People are convinced of the answer, so anyone who then disagrees with them is head of class or whatever like that. So and again, a bit more of a lighthearted one. You mentioned the 8th Air Force, of which you're now a part. Did you watch Masters of the Air?
Oh yes.
So yeah.
So we embrace the modern 8th Air Force. Heavily embraces our history and our legacy, our heritage. We even had a Masters of the Air a premiere party at Barksdale Air Force Base. We got Apple to give us the first episode for us to premiere. We had while Lucky Luckadoo is not in Masters of the Air, was original 100th Bomb Group, which Masters of the Air is based on, the Bloody 100th. He was an original member who also was a consultant on Masters of the Air, and he was alive still at the time. He passed away this past September. So much that, and then through that, Lucky and I created a relationship. And even when you look at the back of my book, here's Lucky's endorsement. While he was still alive, he endorsed my book. So I'm very proud of that and humbled that a B-17 pilot who flew 25 missions over the hellish skies of Europe liked my book enough to put his name on the back of it. So yeah, we very much embraced Masters of the Air. Loved that, the way that series came out for the most part. Pretty good. And we have a very strong relationship with the Bloody Hundredth. I have a good relationship with Dan Rosenthal, who's the son of Rosie Rosenthal, who is in Masters of the Air. He flew 52 missions, which is a mind-boggling feat. And long answer to your question, but yeah, I've seen it.
Was he the gent who he finished his tour and then they extended the other guys to 25 to 30? So he came back and did a second tour. Right?
That's him. That's Rosie.
Amazing. I've looked up it. I've got his book. I picked up his book. I haven't had a chance to. I'm sure you're the same way. I buy a lot more books than I get a chance to read. So
and a side note with Rosie that just fascinates me. So the war's over. Rosenthal, obviously a Jewish name. Rosie is an attorney he's an attorney before he came into the war. So he goes home, and then a couple of years later, he comes back to Germany, and he's part of the legal team for the Nuremberg trials. So very fascinating footnote to Rosie's life.
And he was the one shot down, and he literally landed on the front line between the Germans and the Russians.
Yeah.
That's it.
Got down, came back and kept flying.
Wow. Yeah. Incredible. So what was I going to say? I had something else to say, Master. Oh, yeah, that was it. When you saw Masters of the Air, by this point, you've flown with the crew on combat missions, and then obviously your family history. I guess it's a difficult one with this because let me frame it this way. When you used to watch films that were when you were prior to your service, or even just prior to maybe you going into missions where you thought that the lives of yourself and your crew might be on the line, has that changed the way that you feel about certain films? You see them differently now? When maybe there was a film you used to watch growing up that was, like war films and things. Does that? Did they hit you differently? I suppose.
Oh yeah. I carry a little PTSD, not from my experiences, but the thought of how many hundreds and thousands of lives I took. That hurts. So watching these movies today, the good ones, Saving Private Ryan. Remember how that one ends? Tell me I lived a good life. I mean, whenever I say that and I think about that scene at the end where he's an old man and he's in the cemeteries of Normandy, and he looks to his wife and he tells his wife, "Tell me I lived a good life." I mean, I got chills just saying that just now, and I wouldn't have thought about it like that 10 years ago. Masters of the Air. So I mentioned a minute ago, we had a premiere here at Barksdale where we took one of our hangars, and our community partners helped us spend a lot of money to make it into a really nice theater experience with sound and large screens. And so we hadn't watched it. So my first time to watch it is watching it with the crowd. And we have speakers and public speakers. And we needed an MC, Master of Ceremonies. Well, guess who that was? That was me. So I'm up playing Herd the Cats in between things. And then I introduced the first episode, went and took my seat next to my wife, and it's about an hour long. See, it's hitting me right now. When I walked back up to when the lights go down and the lights came back, and I walked up to get back on the stage to continue our program, I had to wait a few minutes. I mean, I had to wait not a few minutes, but quite a few seconds before I could get back up on the screen. And that's how much the quality of the show was great. But this is to answer your question, yeah. And that was a story to say, well-told stories, whether it's book or a movie form, yeah, they hit me. Yeah.
I want to just kind of follow on to something you said as well about that. You know, because like you said, the job that you do, it's a lot of deaths on the other end of these missions, and I wonder if you feel like that's something that's overlooked with air crews, because I mean, again, like looking at the Second World War, I know that it was a very long time before Bomber Command were ever given their memorials and things like that, because because it was obviously it's different because you were hitting military targets, not cities, so it's different in that sense. But I think people can look at, say, the War on Terror, and they can visualize, oh, this soldier's got PTSD because he saw his friend blown up or something. Whereas,
yeah, that one's easy.
But they probably don't think about the way, because I've heard before about the massive effects of mental health problems with drone pilots and that kind of thing. So is this something that does affect air crews, and if so, is there treatment and systems that are in place for catching that, and have they got better over time if that's the case?
So the first part of your question, yes, I think air crew overlook it. I think they're great at compartmentalizing, and I think it's also conflict specific. So at a certain point, when you have state-on-state conflict, back to my the compartmentalized part of that, it's easy to compartmentalize that those soldiers on the ground that you're performing airstrikes with, that infrastructure, for the most part, are uniform wearing. They were drafted or they volunteered to fight for their country. In the case of GWAT, as you well know, a significant amount of those forces were kids that were forced into being into combat, or young men that were not Taliban are now being forced to fight for the Taliban in the case of enduring freedom. Iraqi freedom there too. I mean, it's a compulsory to be in the military. So again, you've got people that didn't sign up for this, and in an authoritarian state, you got people that don't really agree with their government, but they're being forced to fight for their government. So that's where, for me, when I say I have a touch of PTSD, that's where it goes deeper. It goes to the fact that there are people that were fighting for their country or their cause, that's not what they chose, right? So, yeah. So overall, you're right. I think it's a little bit easier for air power, air crew kind of folks not to go down that road of that dark road.
And did you, when you were serving, was this something that was discussed amongst people, that the strain that this could take on people, not just the strain as well of the reflected on results of missions, but also just the strain of these really long missions, massive amount of pressure on you, people relying on you. In your career, did you see that was something that was beginning to be talked about differently and dealt with in systems within the Air Force differently?
Yeah, so over a 31-year career, yes, there's a difference between year 0 and year 31, but not a big difference. It was 0 talked about on the front end, in the mid to late 80s. talked a little bit about in the 2015, 2017 timeframe when I left and retired from the military, but again, not a whole lot. Now, I didn't answer your question. Are there mechanisms in place? Now, really, there is more conversation overall about suicide and hurting yourself within the military, but not so much specifically conversations about combat-driven PTSD. The mechanisms really are your team, yourself, and the culture has changed enough where most people, including me, it took me a while to speak up. I actually have a good friend, David Donatelli, I'll throw his name out there. He was really the turning point that convinced me I had to say something. That was only just a few years ago. So the culture has changed where I'm going to say it's giving the military member permission to say something now, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then also your teammates. David Donatelli and I didn't we didn't do combat together per se, like in the same airplane, but we served in the same conflicts. So he kind of understood, but he was kind of the guy that said, he gave me permission. You got to say something. Mm. So I did.
Is it a bit like I be told about, say, in the special forces, there's a lot of guys that don't want to speak up because they're terrified of, losing that position that they've worked so hard for. Is it the same with this fear of losing your flight status and that will force people to kind of, like you said, there's healthy compartmentalizing and then obviously unhealthy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's also what I call about healthy pride and bad pride. Mm. Yes, you're exactly right. That was more prevalent 30 years ago, that there was a feeling that if I say something, I'm going to lose my ability to fly airplanes. That is less now, but it still hasn't, the tipping point has not occurred where it really is more, people are more open about it. There is less penalty for saying something. Before, again, it really wasn't, penalty is the wrong word. Repercussions might be the better word. Is you could be removed from flight status for a certain amount of time or for a lengthy time, 20, 30 years ago. That happens less now, a whole lot less.
And your decision to write the book, I mean, speaking for myself, and I know this is quite a common thing with other people, when it comes to uncompartmentalizing everything, I don't know if that's even a word, but let's just roll with it. There's nothing quite as uncompartmentalizing as writing a book. So was that something that, well, actually I say that I'm going to say both sides here. There's also a lot of planning that goes into book as well. But was there any kind of motivation in that for you? You've had this long career, you've had all these experiences of trying to, right, I'm going to bring it all down now and put it in a place, put it out in the open, take it out of me and put it out there.
Yeah, I mean, it was a struggle for a few reasons. I mean, the first one that really was really hard to work through was this mission wasn't just mine. It was shared with 56 other guys, and then all the people that did the maintaining and all the development of the weapon and all. I mean, there's a whole lot more to it, and it felt disloyal to me to sit down and write this book. We do reunions. We started doing reunions at the 25th mark. So we, just like the Doolittle Raiders, we get together every year and we toast to the people of the 5 guys that have already passed away. 4 guys that have already passed away out of our original 57. And so we embrace that heritage, that identity. So there was that already that was in work when I began seriously considering writing this book. And then, frankly, it took some friends of mine. One of them named Chloe Malas. She's a correspondent for NBC News. She was the one that finally tipped me over to say, look, nobody else is going to write this book. This story needs to be told. It's interesting. It's pivotal. It shows how we as a country project power right now through long-range strike and in the employment of bombers. And so she was the one that I finally said, okay, I'm going to do it. And the other part of it is since I'm still hold a security clearance and top secret security clearance, that through writing this, some of it is still in the shadows of a little bit of classification. So a lot of that I had to be very careful as I was writing. Where am I landing on the fence? To the point of even like typing and stopping, because now if I put it electronically in my own computer, that's problematic.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
So there were a lot of times that I had to take, so I have to go scribe some kind of vague note and come back to that later. Ultimately, the United States, if you're a retired military member, you've got to send your book to the DOD, I guess DOW now, for security clearance and review, which I did. So now I know everything in there is cleared and it's blessed. But that was a little bit of a struggle too.
Yeah, God, I didn't even think that. I've never even thought of that. I mean, obviously, for obvious reasons, that you can't go putting things in your computer, because if someone's nefarious actor, they can still access that.
Yeah,
that information.
Yep.
Like, how did you find it? Like, was it an enjoyable process?
It was. So you've picked up on my faith a little bit based on some of your answers, questions, I believe. And so I break down, people say, well, I have God's calling. To me, that's kind of bullshit. All right. Calling is a dream without action. Now, when you've got an assignment or an appointment, that's different, because that requires you to respond somehow. And that's really how this started is as I mentioned, I kind of touched on a minute ago, I was not a writer, not a real big reader either. So I'm going against your
oh yeah.
Yeah. I was more of the science and the athlete guy. My father was a journalist. But when I decided to write this book, and how do you write a book? Well, let's Google, right? Google, how do you write a book? And I did the mind mapping dump that you can do. That's one approach. Just dump whatever you think of out on paper. I don't know, 50 pages later, I realized, I think I've got enough content. Because that was my first thing. How am I going to get enough content? So where I'm going with all this, it eventually, over a couple weeks after I got past that initial building an outline and actually writing real words to match my outline, I enjoyed getting up at 4:30 in the morning. I enjoyed grabbing that coffee and hitting the computer as fast as I could. And that joy, for the most part, stayed with me for 14 months until the book was done. So to me, it was more of a divine assignment. Because again, I was somebody who I did a lot of public speaking, and I even dreaded writing down what I'm going to speak, because I don't rinse and repeat speeches. I do a brand new one every time I speak for the most part. And I would dread even sitting down writing the speech, which is stupid. But I did anyway. I just felt, anxiety. But then when it was decided I'm going to write this book, it flipped 180 degrees out. And I thrived on getting up and writing.
And did you find that like routine was the key for keeping same times that,
It was, yep. Routine was the key. And I had a writing partner. And we had this process where I would write an entire chapter and hand it off to her, and she would do her magic, whether it's punctuation or moving around ideas, or interviewing me because an idea didn't feel right. Okay. So she wasn't a ghostwriter, but she wasn't an editor either. She was whatever that would be in the middle. And
Ghost
so, yeah.
editor.
What?
A ghost editor, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. So she did, again, more editing, but well, yeah, ghost editor might be the best way to call her.
Yeah.
And that was our process. Yeah.
No, it's I believe in everything. I mean, I believe like routine is so important for everything, but especially I think we're right in a lot of times. People can think that, oh, you've just got to wait for the moment to hit you and stuff, and it's no, you got to get your ass to the laptop and you know, I get asked all the time, do you get writer's block? I don't like, and I've always, there's a quote by a British author called Bernard Cornwell, who's one of my favorite authors, and he says, like, look, a nurse doesn't get to have nurse's block, you know. Yeah, see, you know, it's kind of sad, I'm not really feeling it today. It's like, look, you just got to do the job, do it to the best of your ability that day, and then you might come back and decide that it was shit and screw it up and start again. That's fine. Yes, no one's saying, but if your hands haven't fallen off, you can still write. It might not be the best, but you can still write.
There you go.
That routine will build that momentum. And it's like you were saying this earlier. You know, you've got to, how do you build confidence? Well, you know, you build confidence by continuously executing, and that's how you quiet those little voices, by turning up every day, doing what you say you're going to do, and build that up over time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I didn't like to call it writer's block either, but there were times I didn't feel the quality was as good as it be. And then, as you already said, it's a process. And that was the other thing. I had to accept it's a process. It doesn't just happen overnight. Nobody sits down and writes a book in 80,000 word book overnight. It takes a process.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Trey, I'd love to just ask you this, and this might just be a question that you can't really come up with an answer, but I'll try it out anyway. If you could relive one day of your service, can you think of a day? Is there something that jumps out of you as like, if you could relive one day of your service, what would it be?
Yeah, it's the day I retired.
Okay, right.
And not that I would relive it and say I didn't retire. It was a retirement ceremony.
Oh, amazing.
So let me give you context. My father had just passed away 3 weeks before I retired, and we were close. So that I'll use that as my excuse, as I was a little shaken. But what I'm getting at is those type ceremonies are the times where you overwrite. Okay, you probably can relate to that term. Sometimes when you're sitting down and you're writing a historical thing that even happened to you, and you might read back and go, golly, I way overwrote that. You know, you way too many descriptions, and you went deep into describing every little nuance when it wasn't really required. A retirement ceremony is the time to overwrite life. You know, really ensure you're looking in the eyes of everybody there at your ceremony and telling them how much they meant to you, and including, you know, obviously the pinnacle of all that, those thank yous and gratitudes, is your spouse and your family. And looking back, that one haunts me because I didn't do it well. They understand where my heart is, and they understand where my heart was that day. But nevertheless, those are the times where you do find the words that are really overwritten, so that they understand the value that they hold to you personally, and whatever success you're celebrating at that moment, that they were the bedrock of that success, and it wasn't anything you did. So, yeah.
So, Colonel, I'm going to let everyone know where they can get the book, where they can find you online, everything like that. Before I ask you the final question, I just want to thank you so much for your time today. It's been a fascinating conversation. I've got a lot of notes, which I'm going to type up now because you've dropped a lot of pearls of wisdom. I just thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Man, same here. I mean, again, when I was asking around to be on some podcasts like yours, and you go from Joe Rogan, and let's face it, that's a very popular one. I'm not saying that you're not Joe Rogan, but you're to me, you're up in that top 10, 20% of all podcasts. And when you responded to me, I was like, wow. So your reputation precedes you. I really enjoyed getting to know you, hanging out with you for a while. You're a cool cat. And again, thanks for having me on here.
All right. Well, thank you, Kyle. I do appreciate that. And give us a bit of time. We'll get Rogan. We'll get him yet. All right. So, Colonel Morriss, one final question. If you could do it all again, would you do it?
Oh, in a heartbeat.